The year is 1946. A newborn baby girl is welcomed into the world, one of 12 children in a family so poor that legend has it her parents paid the doctor who delivered her with nothing more than a sack of cornmeal. That little girl was Dolly Rebecca Parton, a name that would one day sparkle across billboards, theaters, movie screens, and concert halls around the globe. Fast forward through the decades, and Dolly Parton isn't just a country music star. She's an institution. She's sold over 100 million records worldwide, stacked up 11 Grammy wins out of nearly 50 nominations, built Dollywood into one of America's most beloved theme parks, and even launched a literacy charity, the Imagination Library, that has sent over 200 million free books to children. But behind the wigs, rhinestones, and quick one-liners, Dolly has been living a double life. For 30 years, she built a sparkling public persona that everyone thought they knew, while carefully keeping another quieter self hidden from the spotlight. That contrast, that tug-of-war between Dolly the icon and Dolly the woman, is what makes her story so magnetic. This isn't about scandal or deception. It's about survival. It's about a girl from the Smokies who learned early on that sometimes you have to play a role in public to protect what really matters in private. Dolly Parton's case may have been singing "Coat of Many Colors," but her life was stitched together with far more layers than anyone ever imagined. To understand Dolly's double life, we first need to understand just how far she came. Dolly Parton was born on January 19, 1946, in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, a tiny hamlet near Pittman Center, in the Great Smoky Mountains. She was the fourth of 12 children born to Robert Lee Parton, a sharecropper and construction worker, and Avie Lee Parton, who kept the family together through music and faith. The story goes that the Partons were so strapped for cash when Dolly was born that her father paid the doctor with a sack of cornmeal. Dolly herself has repeated this anecdote with a laugh over the years, never shying away from her humble beginnings. Poverty, in fact, would later fuel some of her most enduring songs like "Coat of Many Colors," written about the patchwork coat her mother stitched together from rags. Life in that one-room cabin was crowded, noisy, and brimming with music. Avie Lee taught her children Appalachian folk songs, and Dolly absorbed the hymns she heard in church. By the time she was 10, she was already performing on local radio stations in Knoxville, and by age 13, she made her first appearance at the Grand Ole Opry, introduced by none other than Johnny Cash. Even then, Dolly knew where she was headed. She once said, "I always knew I was meant for more than a cabin in the woods. I just didn't know how far I'd have to go to get there." True to her word, the very day after she graduated high school in 1964, she packed her bags and moved to Nashville, determined to chase her dream. The early years weren't easy. Nashville was full of hopefuls, and Dolly's high, mountain-tinged voice wasn't exactly the mainstream sound of the time. But persistence was her secret weapon. She signed with Monument Records, initially pushed toward pop, but quickly found her footing in country. Her breakthrough came when Porter Wagoner, the star of The Porter Wagoner Show, invited her to join him on television in 1967. That partnership turned Dolly into a household name. Together they recorded duets, toured the country, and built a loyal fan base. But behind the smiles and matching outfits, Dolly was already proving she had another life inside her, one where she wasn't content to be anyone's sidekick. In 1974, Dolly made the painful decision to leave Wagoner's show to pursue a solo career. To soften the blow, she wrote "I Will Always Love You," a farewell ballad that would go on to become one of the most famous songs in history. That single act encapsulates Dolly's double life perfectly. Sweet on the surface, but rooted in tough decisions, ambition, and the need to define herself on her own terms. The girl who started with nothing but a cornmeal birthright was now well on her way to becoming a star. But stardom required more than a good voice. It required a carefully crafted image. And that's where Dolly's other life really began to take shape. If you ask Dolly Parton about her style, she'll tell you straight. It costs a lot of money to look this cheap. That one-liner, delivered with a wink, sums up the deliberate genius of her persona. In the 1970s, country music was still defined by men in cowboy hats, and women expected to play it sweet and demure. Dolly decided to blow that up. She piled her hair into sky-high wigs, painted her lips bright red, and wore rhinestone gowns that sparkled like a disco ball under stage lights. She once confessed that her look was inspired by what she called the town tramp back home, a woman gossiped about in whispers but remembered for her boldness. Dolly thought, if that's trashy, then trashy sure looks fun. But here's the secret. Dolly's glitz was not just fashion, it was armor. By creating Dolly Parton, the big hair, the busty dresses, the exaggerated femininity, she gave audiences something so dazzling to focus on that they often forgot to dig deeper. Behind that armor, Dolly could keep her private life exactly that, private. She took this commitment so seriously that she has admitted to sleeping in her makeup. Why? Because if a fire or an earthquake struck in the middle of the night, she wanted to be ready to meet the public without breaking the illusion. Imagine caring that much about your image. It sounds exhausting. But for Dolly, it was survival in an industry quick to dismiss women as has-beens the moment they looked too ordinary. Of course, Dolly turned the scrutiny to her advantage. When tabloids speculated about plastic surgery, she beat them to the punch with a joke. If something's bagging, sagging, or dragging, I'll tuck it, suck it, or pluck it, she once quipped. In doing so, she flipped vulnerability into punchlines, staying in control of the narrative. But perhaps the most fascinating part is how she balanced transparency with secrecy. Dolly could talk for hours about her wigs, her makeup routine, or even her exaggerated bust line. But when it came to the more intimate corners of her life, her marriage, her struggles, her faith, she tightened the curtain. Fans thought they knew her, but the truth is, they only knew the version she wanted them to see. This balancing act wasn't deception, it was strategy. By building Dolly the spectacle, she protected Dolly the soul. She carved out a space where she could survive the pressures of fame, remain in charge of her career, and still keep her deepest truths sacred. And yet, as we'll see, Dolly's contradictions only multiplied. She was the glittering queen of country, but she was also the woman who shocked fans by posing for Playboy. She was a devout Christian writing gospel music while simultaneously chasing crossover success on the pop and rock charts. She was generous and philanthropic, but also shrewdly business-minded, turning herself into a brand decades before that became the norm. The wig and the rhinestones weren't just a look. They were the mask that let her live two lives, one for the world and one for herself. By the time the rhinestones were blinding and the wigs reached skyscraper heights, Dolly Parton had built herself into a brand. But every brand has its fine print, and Dolly's was written in invisible ink. Let's start with the most enduring mystery, her marriage. Dolly Parton married Carl Thomas Dean on May 30th, 1966. The ceremony was tiny, just Dolly, Carl, her mother, the preacher, and the preacher's wife. Carl was her partner for nearly 6 decades, yet for most fans, he's a ghost. He rarely appears in public, never attends red carpets, and the man has declined interviews with a consistency that could win Olympic gold. This fueled endless speculation. Was he real? Were they secretly divorced? Was Dolly covering up some hidden romantic life? She leaned into the rumors with humor, once joking that people thought she had a mannequin in the closet she called Carl. In reality, Carl simply hated the spotlight. While Dolly was building Dollywood, touring stadiums and starring in 9 to 5, Carl was running an asphalt paving company and living a low-key life in Nashville. That contrast is so epic. Dolly dazzling in sequins, Carl in work boots at home. It was one of the clearest examples of her double life. And then there's Dolly's faith. She's never shied away from talking about her Christianity. Growing up in the Smokies, gospel music was stitched into her DNA. She's released multiple gospel albums and insists she prays every day. Yet in 1978, Dolly shocked conservative fans when she posed for Playboy. She didn't pose nude. She wore the famous bunny suit, ears and all. But the idea of a gospel-singing country girl appearing in Playboy was almost scandalous. Dolly brushed it off, later laughing that she did it because she looked kinda cute back then and wanted to flaunt it while she could. That contradiction, Bible in one hand, bunny ears in the other, is pure Dolly. She never fit neatly into one box. And maybe that's the key. The double life wasn't about hiding sins. It was about refusing to be pinned down. Her music tells the same story. Remember that on one single night in 1973, she wrote two of her biggest songs, Jolene and I Will Always Love You. One is about jealousy and temptation. The other is about tender farewell. To channel such different emotions in a single sitting hints at how many emotional worlds Dolly was navigating at once. Then there's her business empire. Fans see Dollywood as a theme park filled with roller coasters and cinnamon bread. But behind the curtain, Dolly is an astute businesswoman. She owns multiple companies under the Dollywood umbrella, has invested in media ventures, and has built her brand with surgical precision. Yet she downplays this side of herself, often pretending to be just a country girl while making multi-million-dollar decisions. That's another form of her double life, the savvy CEO hidden beneath the sparkly gowns. And let's not forget philanthropy. Dolly's Imagination Library, launched in 1995, has mailed over 200 million free books to children across the globe. She has funded hospitals, scholarships, and famously donated $1 million toward COVID-19 vaccine research at Vanderbilt University. Yet she's always quick to make light of her generosity, insisting she doesn't do it for praise. Dolly once said, "I just think it's important to give back if you've been blessed, and I've been more blessed than I ever deserved." Still, even her philanthropy holds a double edge. The public sees the generosity. Dolly sees a mission rooted in her childhood poverty and her faith, the side of her life she often keeps quieter. So by the 1980s and 90s, Dolly was living on two tracks, one blindingly public, one fiercely private, and both were working in harmony. But here's the thing, keeping up two lives isn't easy, which begs the question, why did she cling to that separation for so long? Living two lives may sound glamorous, but in reality, it's more like juggling fire. Dolly managed it for decades, and the reasons run deeper than wigs and witty comebacks. First, there's the sheer pressure of fame. Imagine waking up every day knowing millions of people feel entitled to your story, your secrets, your heartbreaks. Dolly understood early that fame can eat you alive if you don't set boundaries. By creating a glittering version of herself, she gave fans something to feast on while keeping the tender parts of her heart locked away. It was self-preservation in sequence. Second, let's talk about gender. Dolly entered country music in the 1960s, when women were often expected to be sweet, submissive, and secondary. By exaggerating her femininity, the makeup, the wigs, the humor about her figure, she seized control of the joke before anyone else could use it against her. When critics called her too flashy, she laughed louder. When they mocked her bust, she turned it into a punchline. That's power. And that persona let her climb ladders that might have otherwise been pulled away. Thirdly, there's control. Dolly wasn't just a singer. She was a songwriter and businesswoman. She owns her publishing rights, a move that secured her millions when Whitney Houston's version of I Will Always Love You became one of the best-selling singles of all time. She knew that to stay in control of her music and her money, she had to play the long game. The public Dolly distracted the world, while the private Dolly signed contracts, built empires, and played chess while everyone else thought she was playing checkers. But make no mistake, the double life carried risks. Keeping secrets meant fueling rumors. For decades, tabloids speculated about everything from her sexuality to her marriage to supposed affairs with co-stars. Dolly brushed these off with humor, saying, "People are always talking. If they're talking about me, at least they're leaving someone else alone." Still, the mental toll of always deflecting, always editing your answers, must have been heavy. There were moments when the strain showed. In interviews from the 80s, you can see Dolly pause before answering questions about Carl Dean or about loneliness on the road. In her 1994 autobiography, Dolly, My Life, and Other Unfinished Business, she admitted to bouts of depression and self-doubt. She even confessed to a period in the 1980s where she contemplated suicide, a stark reminder that beneath the wigs was a human being trying to cope. So why keep the double life if it was so exhausting? Because the alternative, giving it all away, was worse. Dolly once said, "I'm not going to limit myself just because people won't accept the fact that I can do something else." By separating her private self from her public self, she gave herself room to expand, to experiment, to survive. And in a way, it worked brilliantly. Think of it like this. When fans saw Dolly in a rhinestone jumpsuit cracking jokes about her bust, they were entertained. When Dolly went home, took off the wig, and sat with Carl Dean on their porch, she was safe. Both lives mattered, but they didn't have to overlap. Still, holding that balance for 30 years was a high-wire act. And like all high-wire acts, there were moments when the rope shook, when Dolly's private self peeked out from behind the curtain and reminded the world she was more than sequins and sass. By keeping Carl out of the spotlight, Dolly ensured that she had a piece of her life untouched by fame. It was a double act. Dolly Parton, the global superstar, and Dolly Parton, the private wife who cooked dinner at home. That duality is what kept her sane in an industry that swallows people whole. Few fans knew about her battle with depression in the 1980s, a period she later described in her memoir, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. She masked it with her trademark humor and energy, but behind the glitter, she was quietly facing health issues, heartbreak, and emotional strain. Only years later did she open up about those moments, proving once again that the Dolly we saw on stage was only half the story. In other words, Dolly's glittering mask wasn't deception, it was strategy. It was her way of giving us exactly what we wanted, while keeping for herself what she truly needed. On one hand, Foot is the image of Southern hospitality, kind, generous, family-oriented. On the other, she's edgy, daring, and completely unafraid of shocking the world. Who else could donate millions to children's literacy and medical research while also posing for Playboy? That's Dolly. She wore the iconic bunny outfit in 1978, later reprised it at age 75 for her husband's birthday, and told fans, "I did it because I still had the boobs and the waistline." Classic Dolly. And then there's her philanthropy. Dolly doesn't just give back, she reinvents what giving back looks like. Her Imagination Library, which began as a small program in Tennessee, has now mailed more than 200 million free books to children worldwide. She also quietly donated $1 million to help fund Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine research in 2020, a gesture that led people to jokingly say, "Forget superheroes, Dolly Parton is the reason we can go outside again." But here's where her contradictions get even more delicious. While she's built an empire on country music, Dolly has never been afraid to jump genres. In the 1980s, she crossed over into pop with hits like 9 to 5 and Here You Come Again. And in 2023, at 77 years old, she went full rock star with her album Rockstar. We're talking duets with Paul McCartney, Elton John, Stevie Nicks, and more. Fans were stunned, critics were impressed, and Dolly just grinned. She admitted she only made the record because she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and felt she had to earn it. That's Dolly's style. When challenged, she doesn't just show up, she shows up bigger, bolder, and sparklier than anyone else. And yet beneath all the contradictions, there's a through line. Dolly does what Dolly wants. She's not bound by categories or expectations. She can be wholesome and sexy, humble and flamboyant, private and larger than life, all at the same time. That's the paradox that makes her timeless. Dolly Parton's story is the ultimate American fairy tale. She was born in a one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains, paid for with a sack of cornmeal. She grew up without electricity, without plumbing, often without shoes. Yet she turned those humble beginnings into the foundation of one of the most remarkable careers in music history. Her so-called double life wasn't about scandal, it was about survival. Dolly built a dazzling public persona that allowed her to shine on stage while keeping her real self safe behind the curtain. For 30 years, she lived that double life seamlessly, fooling no one but at the same time fooling everyone. And maybe that's the real lesson. Dolly Parton teaches us that you don't have to be just one thing. You can be glitter and grit, faith and freedom, fantasy and reality. You can be Dolly Parton the icon and Dolly Parton the woman, and you can let both lives flourish without compromise. So when we say Dolly lived a double life for 30 years, what we really mean is this. Dolly lived life on her own terms. And in doing so, she didn't just become a superstar, she became folklore, a living legend whose story will be told long after the last rhinestone fades. Thanks for watching till the end. By the way, which Dolly Parton double life moment surprised you most? Let us know in the comments. And while you're down there, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you're always in the front row for our next content.